Thank you for returning to Anthracite Horror Stories. And today we're going to discuss the infamous Irish terroristic organization known as the Molly Maguires of 1870s, 1880s fame in the anthracite coal fields. And I'm going to just quickly go over the items in front of us. Here we have a teapot oil wick lamp, which is burning kerosene. That's from the Monongahela Valley out in Pittsburgh. This was a Hazelton manufactured teapot oil wick lamp. It still has the original wick in it. A little dry rotted, but that's the original. It's really crazy. It's a bigger and meatier version of the one burning. Here we have a smaller mule shoe. It came from the anthracite fields. It's in pretty good condition considering. That's well over 100 years old. You can still see the nails in it. And lastly, well not lastly, next to last, this is a hand crank coal auger. This was before mechanization in the anthracite field, and everything was done by oil wick lamp for illumination and also just brute strength from the coal miners. So this would have had a little piece of metal going through it and a primitive wooden handle, and they would have cranked it like this, causing this style of action. And they would have went up to the coal face, inserted this, and this little split would allow for the coal to pass through and come through these grooves. And then when that went all the way down, I love those vehicles, sorry for that. And they would have pulled out of the coal vein, placed their drill down, filled it with black powder that they had to purchase in the company store themselves, and then tamp the shot with clay or coal soot or whatever, and then light their squibs and blast their coal from the face and repeat day in and day out, all through hand power, which is pretty crazy. So you have a very primitive candle on your head and just your muscle power. No mechanization back then. There was steam power, you know, for the hoists, lowering men up and down the shafts, and later on they would have air compressed drills, but that was the old school way of doing it with that hand coal auger there. So today we're going to talk about the Irish Catholic Molly Maguires, and that's why I have the Blessed Mother here. Just zoom into her feet there. That's symbolically stepping on evil that plagues the earth and the universe as a whole. That's why I just have the Blessed Mother here. Now, the Molly Maguires apparently plagued the anthracite coal fields of Pennsylvania. I'll let this vehicle pass here. Tractor here. They apparently plagued the coal fields of Pennsylvania, leading to a bunch of breakers being burned, rail lines being uprooted and derailed, causing mayhem, beatings, intimidation, mine bosses being beaten and murdered, etc. And it culminated in 1877 and 1878 when 20 Irish Catholic miners were hung. And they were hung in Pottsville, Mock Chunk, Sunbury, and Bloomsburg. And they literally hung these men, and these men didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to their families. And the local government and the coal companies played it up so much that they had to bring in the militia complete with cannons, because they were worried there was going to be an uprising when they were hanging these men. Now, I'm not the only person to state this, but I don't believe the Molly Maguires ever existed. And if they did exist, it was not to the extent of the official narrative. If you've ever seen the 1970 Sean Connery movie, The Molly Maguires, you could get an idea as to the narrative that was portrayed in popular culture. I truly don't believe, however, that it existed. And I actually believe that the coal companies themselves were causing mayhem, or turning blind eyes to the mayhem to allow it to occur and not to stop it in order to get their desired outcome. And that would be through the burning of breakers and some murders. Why would they allow that, would you say? I believe that because they were trying to suppress union formation. So what's a few coal breakers when they're already insured, and or railroads and or production numbers? They weren't terribly worried about the short term or even near future financial wreckage that would cause, because in the long term they wouldn't have the Irish Catholics forming a coal union. So my theory is, and I'll get into it here, that the Reading Coal Company, Reading Railroad, but thus Reading Coal Company because they had illegal quotas set for production, caused the Molly Maguire mayhem, and was probably, in my eyes, behind it. All the violence and craziness. They were playing it up in order to suppress union formation and ultimately kill men by hanging them in the gallows through the official judiciary here in Pennsylvania, doing it the right way to set an example. If you cross us, this is what happens. If you want to rise up, cause mayhem, we'll hang you, and that's that. You'll be forgotten. We will crush you like the scum and filth you are. And my reasoning for that will be outlined by Frank Gowen, who is the president of Reading Railroad and Anthracite. He was a real winner. He had cut the miners' pay by 20 to 25%. I can't remember what exact number it was. They were already making terrible money. They had to pay for their teapot oil wick lamps. They had to pay for the fuel in the lamps. They had to pay for their coal augers. They had to pay for everything. Minor infractions, they were docked. Horrible working conditions. 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour days were worked. Very stupid things would cost them their jobs. But they were dirt poor, let's face it. I mean, it was literally indentured servitude back then. And then they're going to dock their pay 20 to 25% during the late 1870s, when there was a depression and a panic of the markets, and he's wondering why people would get angry. Well, violence did break out, but like I stated, my theory is that they allowed the violence, or even perpetrated the violence themselves, for a greater outcome, which would be to kill the peasantry in order to quell any union formation desire, which did happen because the union was not formed until 1902. So this is in the mid-1870s, 1876, 1877, and 1878, culminated in 1878 with the final hangings of the Molly Maguires, quote-unquote, the Molly Maguires. So let's go over the case a little bit. But before we do, we'll talk about the Irish Catholics and how they were not really liked, to say the least. If you've ever seen Gangs of New York, it's a pretty good representation of how the Irish were hated. They were seen as subhuman, substandard, literally subhuman. They weren't seen as white They weren't seen as proper Christians. There was just a hatred of Catholicism, and a lot of that still holds true to this day. I've even experienced that when I was in the army and just living life, and you tell people you're a Catholic. A lot of hatred, but you know, it is what it is. They didn't see it that way, and a lot of people don't see it that way today, that all Christians are one. A lot of hatred towards the Catholics, and back then it was absolutely fever pitch. So you had essentially people coming off the boat that were promised a great life of luxury here if they worked hard, and you know what, they died penniless. Their kids would inherit their debt, and they too would be forced to work off their parents' debt, their father's debt, in the coal mines, the same coal mines. So like if a miner died, he had to pay for marked up products at the company store and food, etc. And if he died, you didn't get a payday from the coal company. If you died in a mining accident today, you'd probably be paid off if you worked for a corporation. The family would be paid off, that is. You can sue or whatever. There was no such thing. They didn't even close the mines usually when tons of people died. You'd reopen right back up. Just forget about you, dump your body on the porch. So, your kids had to work off that debt. So it was really crazy. But these people were treated horribly. So that would endure up until the early 1900s when the Italians came, and the Eastern Europeans such as the Poles and the Russians and the Ukrainians, Hungarians, Lithuanians. Then they would bore the next stage of hatred for their ethnicity in the coal field. And this is very well noted. You can look that up. It's not propaganda, it's truth. But the original coal operators and businessmen were British and German and Welsh. And again, they brought a lot of their old country hatred of Catholicism and for the Irish here to the U.S. These blood feuds and turf feuds would spill over here in the United States of America. So the Irish Troubles were the Troubles in Schuylkill County, Luzerne County, Lackawanna County, Carbon County. Make no mistake about that. Couldn't escape it, even though there was an ocean in between those two continents. So why I think it was all a shamble is because Frank Gowen, who was president of Reading Railroad, and thus Reading Anthracite, because they were incestual organizations, he would quote-unquote infiltrate the Molly Maguires as president of Reading Anthracite. He would infiltrate them through a private organization, detective agency, that once provided security for President Lincoln, known as the Pinkerton Detective Agency. He would infiltrate them, and they would see that this was a super secret organization, and they were terrible, and all this violence and murder and threats of other murder and violence was uncovered, and it was horrible, and they just did such a great thing for keeping capitalism safe because, thank God they took down Alexander Campbell and Jack Kehoe of the Molly Maguires, because these were evil men that were greedy and just dangerous animals. But really what happened was, in my eyes, Reading Anthracite was worried about the formation of the Union, which the supposed Molly Maguires were trying to get better conditions and better pay, which they deserved. And that was making them very pissed off and nervous. So they're like, you know what? Let's take these people down, man. Let's infiltrate them, get our evidence, and martyr them. And martyr them, not for a good cause, just whack them. No one will remember them. That's exactly what happened, because he hired a private detective agency. They took their evidence. Frank Gowen, who was also the special prosecutor in the cases. He named himself special prosecutor for these criminal cases. Can you imagine how crazy that is? And how that would not be kosher for today? Well, I shouldn't really say it. There's kind of similar stuff going on today. We won't get into that. But the owner of the coal company also appoints himself as special prosecutor for these criminal trials, and also is the one that hired all of the detectives and the infiltrators to get the evidence. So I think he just fabricated all this evidence. And they had a bunch of actual people that did commit crimes, like one guy by the name of Kerrigan, forget his first name, but Irishman obviously, last name Kerrigan, who supposedly killed a police officer. Now his wife said that he himself, after the hangings took place, Kerrigan would be acquitted, had nothing brought about him, was allowed to go about his life. He actually killed a police officer, and this was what one of the Molly Maguires were hung for. And the Gowan, the Reading Anthracite guy, the special prosecutor, the hangman, he said that he could walk if he, proved, if he gave his testimony against the other gentleman. So that's what happened. He said this guy did it, and they hung an innocent man, his wife said, Kerrigan's wife said. So you had a lot of informants that apparently may have done the crimes themselves and to save their own skin, pointed to these labor leaders. So ultimately 20 men were hung, I believe, for crimes that they didn't perpetrate. And being an Irish Catholic myself, the biggest reason why I think this whole story is bull is because none of these men ever confessed to any of the crimes. None of them even said that they were a Molly Maguire, and that's pretty telling, because the historians and also the coal company said, well, they were a super secret organization, as per being a Molly Maguire. You could never, ever admit to being a Molly Maguire. I don't, that's bull, because as an Irish Catholic, we're taught, especially if you're going to gallows and you're an actual murder, you're going to want to repent for your sins. You're not going to want that on your conscience, because you're not going to get into the kingdom of heaven. And you have to have, you have to atone for your sins. You're supposed to confess and truly be repentant. But, Alexander Campbell even famously picked up some dirt and rubbed it on the Jim Thorpe mock chunk prison wall there and said, you're hanging an innocent man. As long as this handprint is there, it will show that I'm innocent. And, that goes until, there's some people that say that's bull, but, this guy did actually say that he was innocent. These no one ever said that they killed anyone, burned anything, and or were part of a super secret Irish Catholic group known as the Molly Maguires. And obviously historians do disagree on this, but I'll read a couple quotes here from Wikipedia that were pretty interesting. It's a really good quote here. Just trying to find it, I apologize. The one quote, which came from Carbon County Judge John P. Lavelle, states verbatim, "The Molly Maguire trials were a surrender of state sovereignty. A private corporation initiated the investigation through a private detective agency. A private police force arrested the alleged defenders, and private attorneys for the coal companies prosecuted them. The state provided only the courtroom and the gallows." And that's very telling. I mean, this was an actual Carbon County judge, and that would be in the Bloomsburg area. And it is disgusting. It was a total conflict of interest. It's just, that would not hold water today. These men would all be acquitted based on, in a lot of people's eyes, fabricated evidence. It was a setup. Supposedly a setup, but I don't think it was a setup. I think that the coal company was causing a lot of this. So this was Frank Gowen. This is taken off of Wikipedia. Interesting about him is in 1889 he was found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, supposedly. His family said, oh yeah, he came from a long line of familial insanity, basically saying that a lot of people in the family were insane, and he just killed himself because he was actually fired from the Reading Railroad, which is pretty funny. Bit of karma there. But in addition to that, some people say, oh, the Molly Maguires got their revenge. Some, 11 years after the last Molly Maguire was hung, they went down and shot him. So who knows? But what's also interesting on the Wikipedia article, it says that the murders, these are authors Richard O. Boyer and Herbert M. Moraes, argue that the killings were not one-sided. Militant miners, meaning miners that didn't like the coal companies and pushed for union formation, often disappeared, and their bodies were sometimes being found later in deserted mine shafts. And that's definitely true. There was the coal and iron police. They had their own police force. The coal companies actually had their own police force and would kill people. They would beat the living hell out of kids and women picking coal from the coal piles or along the railroad tracks. Yeah, it was crazy time to be alive. No justice for those people. But I firmly believe that there was no Molly Maguires. If they did exist, I don't believe that it was on the level that Reading Anthracite said it was. And I truly feel as though that these men were innocent, because again, none claim to be active murderers or active members of any secret organization, as in any Catholic, especially back then. They weren't like a lot of Catholics today. These people actually went to church and believed and practiced what they preached. None of them confessed to any murders, so that's completely telling. I think Frank Gowen was evil, total vulture capitalist, did not care about fellow man, and that was just one example of many evil things that a lot of coal companies did around here. So let me know what you think in the description, if you agree or disagree, or not in the description, sorry, in the comment section, if you agree or disagree that the Molly Maguires ever existed. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. See ya.